Honestly, sometimes I don't know what I could offer them, because even from afar, you see the struggles and the hardships and the unbelievable amount of courage and strength and resilience that these women need to have, especially when you lose loved ones. I believe there's a value called sumud in Arabic, and it's an ideology amongst women, Palestinian women, to sort of steadfastly persevere against all forms of injustice.
Malaysia has always been on the side of justice, people and government supporting the people of Palestine in their struggle for freedom, justice, and national independence. In order to talk about all that, we have via Skype from Malaysia our ambassador, Mr. Walid Abu Ali. Welcome, Ambassador.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum.
Former Minister of Youth and Sport, Sayyid Sadeq. Welcome to the program, Sayyid Sadeq.
Assalamu alaikum.
And you're welcome. And also we have Miss Universe Malaysia, Debora Henry, the founder of Refugees Foundation. Welcome to the program, Debora.
Thank you very much.
We are going to start with the ambassador to Malaysia, Mr. Walid Abu Ali. Tell us about the position of the Malaysian government and the Malaysian people of the current situation in Palestine in light of the last Israeli aggression on Jerusalem yesterday, organizing what it is called the March of the Flags and the violations against the Palestinian youth, women and children just yesterday in Jerusalem, and today morning the Israeli air raid on the Gaza Strip. You welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, dear Osama. I'm grateful for Palestinian TV to organize such event. Of course, it's nothing new for Malaysians. If there are some differences in Asia, Palestine usually unify all Malaysians.
Yeah.
And the great support of Malaysians to Palestine, it's not questionable. The government and the people of Malaysia always show their solidarity and support to Palestine.
Yeah, Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for this inclusive introduction, really. And I move now to His Excellency, Mr. Sayyid Sadeq. Sayyid Sadeq, I watched some videos for you and heard your statements in support of the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian people's rights. And I want you to tell us what are the grounds of your position and the support for the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian people, please.
Thank you. I support Palestine not just because I'm a Malaysian or a Muslim.
Yes.
I support Palestine because this is an issue which involves humanity overall, a clear violation of international law, humanitarian law by the Israeli occupants, especially previously under the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. That's why I believe that it's not just Malaysia, but people and governments across the world should unite to speak out and condemn the brutal human rights violations, war crimes and atrocities committed by the Israeli government. And the fact that even after the change in government, now led under Naftali Bennett, the still same aggression takes place is truly saddening and should be condemned. The ultra-nationalist march towards Jerusalem was a clear act of provocation. The fact that it took place right after a ceasefire was brokered between Israel and Palestine clearly shows that they want violence, and they were chanting during the march, death to Palestine, death to Arabs. How do you expect peaceful Palestinians to react and respond to this after just weeks ago, more than 250 Palestinians were massacred and murdered. And right after that, after the peace was brokered, this provocative ultra-nationalist march took place. I think this is a clear act of provocation, and the international community should not sit silent and condemn not just the previous Israeli government, but the new government led under Naftali Bennett.
Yes, and Ms. Debora, as our ambassador said, that you founded the Foundation for Supporting Refugees, and we know that half of the Palestinian people are refugees. And we want to talk about the refugees living in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in occupied Jerusalem, because the Israeli government has taken a decision to expel them. And we know that these people there are refugees from Palestine occupied in 1948. So how you express your support for these people there?
Well, it is extremely sad. And this is why I set up a nonprofit, because of injustice. Mm-hmm. And that for people around the world to understand that refugees don't just leave their country to come to Malaysia, for example, but they also can be refugees within their own state, internally displaced people. So I've been following the stories of individuals like Muhammad El-Kurd, mm-hmm. and to see what's going on the ground. And what I think is so important nowadays is that we're hearing the stories of the youth and right directly from their mouth, because we see it on their social media. And it is extremely sad that basic rights are not met: access to education, healthcare, yes. livelihoods, and the huge unemployment, but also that people cannot live with dignity. Yeah. And that, I think, is one of the most important aspects of human life. Yeah. And so my job is to tell that story for people to know, because if people don't know what's happening, they will not be informed and empowered to do something.
Yeah, thank you, Debora. And Mr. Sayed, your position as MP, the Parliament of Malaysia, what activities you have and connections with other parliaments around the world in order to build up these parliaments' support for the rights of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause, whether the Asian countries' parliaments or parliaments around the world in general?
There are three key things. Firstly,
yes.
When I served as the Minister of Youth and Sports, I stood solidly in support of Palestine. And when there were Israeli athletes who wanted to come to Malaysia, I disallowed as long as the ban on Palestinian athletes to play without travel restrictions from Israel was still placed. So if Israel can play politics in sports, Malaysia should respond in defense of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. Secondly, after the recent crisis between Palestine and Israel, not just me, but many members of parliament across party lines, those in government and opposition, work together by contacting our international counterparts, members of parliament across Asia and Europe, to come up with a united statement condemning the disproportionate response from the Israeli Defense Force. And finally, all of us came together, those in government and opposition, together with NGO representatives, to fundraise for Palestinian NGOs to ensure that the rebuilding of Palestine can be done together. We treat Palestinians as our brothers and sisters, to the point of those who choose to insult and assault Palestine is equivalent to insult and assaulting fellow Malaysians.
Yeah, and Ms. Debora, a relevant question. I know that you have a very significant role when it comes to humanitarian affairs and the humanitarian assistance when it comes to the issues of children. And we watch all the time the Israeli soldiers and the Israeli colonizers' violence against the Palestinian children in particular. And we saw the massacres committed in Gaza. So how do you use your position and your foundation for networking with other civil society organizations, non-profit organizations, in order to make the situation of these children visible and support them at international level?
Yes, thank you. So the reality is we get caught up in the news of war, what we see on the TV stations.
Yeah.
It becomes politicized and it becomes very complicated. And so a lot of people don't want to deal with it and they stay away from it. They don't think that they can make a difference. What we try to do is tell the human story, that the numbers are not just, when we talk about 60-something children who died in the recent bombings, they have faces, they have stories. And so how do we tell this story of the child? Because very often during conflict, like situations like this, children suffer the most and in silence. And the trauma that they experience goes on for generations. So it is very important that they get the right support and the right help, regardless of whether the conflict stops or doesn't, is that they are being taken care of. And so we work with many different organizations in Malaysia and globally. So, and number one is to do advocacy, to talk about it, to share the faces, to help people understand what children are going through, and also then to give people options of how they can help. And number one is education. We've seen in Malaysia huge amounts of fundraising over the past few weeks. Even my own business, we make jewelry, and we've dedicated a percentage of that money to Palestinian refugees in Malaysia. And so telling the story, showing people how they can really help, and that every individual can make a difference and can change the life of a child.
Yeah. And Ambassador Abu Ali, you have these great people with you who support justice and freedom, not only for the people of Palestine, but for humanity in general. Tell us about the connection between the embassy, the Palestinian embassy, and the Parliament of Malaysia and its members like Sayyid Sadeq, and also with non-profit organizations and civil society organizations in Malaysia to garner support for the cause of Palestine?
Well, thank you very much for a very important question. The embassy is the legitimate representative of Palestine in Malaysia. And just let me highlight that the parliament, its last session, had created a booth in the parliament under a very effective title, Unite for Palestine. And the Committee for Palestine within the parliament had asked all parliamentarians to sign a statement. So that statement, through the committee, handed over to the embassy. At the same time, they initiated a bank account through Wisma Putra, which is the Foreign Ministry of Malaysia, and this bank account for Palestine was reactivated. So we coordinated with the Foreign Ministry in Malaysia that any fundraising for Palestine can be processed through this bank account in Wisma Putra. And the Foreign Minister, Excellency Shamsuddin Hussein himself, and his deputy, Dr. Qamaruddin Jafar, are supervising by themselves the process of the fundraising and the transaction of this money to Palestine. We arranged a program, the Red Crescent of Malaysia, together with the Red Crescent of Palestine, and the Malaysia government and NGOs are very much active and working shoulder to shoulder to help as much as they can, in particularly the homeless Palestinians, and to rebuild what has been damaged by the Israeli aggression against Gaza.
Yeah, and two more questions to Mr. Sayyid Sadeq and Ms. Debora. Sayyid Sadeq, when you were the Minister of Youth and Sport, and you called and you translated that into action, preventing Israeli athletes from entering Malaysia for a power swimming competition. And some people said that we should not mix between politics and the sport. But you proved that boycott should include all aspects of colonial life in order to achieve justice for the colonized people. Do you have now any activities or any connections to support the BDS to force Israel to end its occupation for the Palestinian land?
I just want to point out that if it's up to me, I wouldn't want to conflate sports and politics. Unfortunately, it was Israel first who banned Palestinian athletes from representing their state in international community by putting many unnecessary and illegitimate travel restrictions for Palestinian teams to represent themselves. Let's not forget that Gaza's Al-Ittihad Al-Shajira sports team was banned by Israel from representing Gaza. Let's not forget that the Israeli government, through the sports minister, placed pressure on NBA in the United States from even mentioning Palestine as a legitimate state. So I believe if no other countries out there would have the backbone to stand for Palestine, the least that Malaysia can do is to speak up on behalf of Palestine. And the BDSM movement in Malaysia is well known. And that's why we see many companies which are directly linked to funding or supporting IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, have been boycotted either directly or indirectly. So Malaysians, regardless of race and religion, are very conscious of the Palestinian plights and the sufferings which they go through. And I believe as His Excellency, the Ambassador pointed out, issues of Palestine is one of the rare issues which could directly unite all Malaysians, all politicians, all corporates, because this is something which is close to our heart, because we see it as a humanitarian issue, not just as an issue which involves politics, race, and religion.
Thank you, Sayyid Sadeq. And Debora, you are also active in the field of women. And you know that the situation of the Palestinian women is very special. Just yesterday in Jerusalem, we saw the Israeli police kicking and punching, dropping women on the ground. Women in Palestine are losing their children at the hands of the Israeli occupation soldiers. Women are deprived of the right to free movement. So the whole picture when it comes to the Palestinian women under Israeli occupation is gloomy, and many, many women now are heading their families without husbands, being killed by the Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip. So what is your message to the Palestinian women who have this very special situation in Palestine?
Thank you for that. I honestly, sometimes I don't know what I could offer them, because even from afar, you see the struggles and the hardships and the unbelievable amount of courage and strength and resilience that these women need to have, especially when you lose loved ones. I believe there's a value called sumud in Arabic, and it's an ideology amongst women, Palestinian women, to sort of steadfastly persevere against all forms of injustice. And I think that really sums it up. They have to be strong for their children and the young girls and the young boys. The way I look at it is we can't keep having generation after generation growing up with the bitterness and the resentment and the hate, and the cycle will never stop. What I see now on social media is the youth coming alive. They have a voice and they're using it, and they are being heard, not just by, as we talked earlier, by Muslims or countries that traditionally have always supported Palestine, but also the world at large. And so I think this is a very special moment for our young men, young women, to unite the youth of the world. And I really see this as being a time unlike any before, where we can really make change happen on, as Syed Sadeq said, humanitarian grounds, because this is just wrong and unjust what's happening.
Yeah.
And we cannot see more children suffer.
Yeah.
So my short prayer and solidarity with these women women and children is to know that the world is with you, we are with you, and we do what we can in our ways, big and small, to support you and to say we see you and we feel your pain, and we stand with you to hopefully make this apartheid end.
Yeah, Debora Henry, founder of Refugees Foundation, thank you very much. Ambassador to Malaysia, Walid Abu Ali, thank you. And MP, former Minister of Youth and the Sport of Malaysia, Sadeq Said, thank you very much all for joining our program. It has been great pleasure, really.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for watching. And from me, Usama Nazal, goodbye.